Good evening, everybody, and welcome to London Drama. We've got Pete Molyneux this evening. Pete, over to you.
Thanks, Amanda, and it's lovely to be here again, here with yourself and Chris and London Drama. And it's wonderful to see so many people who have joined us from around the world. And I'm looking forward to this session now. I'm a drama teacher of many, many years, working in the UK and now living in Ireland. I live in Galway, Ireland, and I've spent around 30 odd years working in schools, primary, secondary, with youth theatres and with adults. And my book, Interdependence Day, Teaching the Sustainable Development Goals Through Drama for All Ages, comes directly out of my work over those years. So I start with the basic idea that the Sustainable Development Goals, which there are 17, are what the world came up with when the United Nations met and decided to try and do something about all the challenges we face on our planet. Dire challenges, crucial challenges, urgent challenges. And the decision was these were the 17 goals that are going to help us through into the future, are going to help us out of the various messes that we're in. And so to begin with, my position would be that every classroom should have the Sustainable Development Goals on their wall. In fact, every government building, every public space, every home, if these are the goals that we as global citizens have agreed on are our goals, we should be thinking about them every day. They should be kind of fused into every moment of our lives. And certainly in education, it should be part of every classroom, every lesson, every moment. We even as I talk, we see ourselves going backwards on so many of these sustainable development goals. Here we are in a world where we're facing into a brand new war. We even have the threat of nuclear war being held over our heads. We have a world which is becoming increasingly marginalized and divided. The climate change threatens us with extinction. We're destroying our biodiversity and our fellow species. We're increasingly putting power and wealth into the tiny minority of powerful people. The list goes on. And so these goals should be there on the wall all the time. It's not a luxury item. It's not a side dish. It's essential. So, and then moving from that, we say, well, why explore through drama? Well, the world at the moment, despite our wonderful education systems and thousands of years of civilization, we find ourselves on the brink of nuclear war, facing into another horrendous war. We are clearly haven't got it right. We clearly have to be thinking of different solutions, different ways of looking at things. And of course, drama is almost unique within the education system of providing a situation where both teacher and students, pupils, will go into a session with open-minded, open eyes, where the teacher and the students are learning alongside each other. The teacher doesn't come in with ready-made answers, ready-made solutions, and just wanting to impart it to the students. So here you are, you can have all the knowledge that I have. The teacher learns alongside the students in an explorative way. And the main driver, the vehicle for the energy of the process is the imagination. We're working through the imagination, around which other components, cooperation, articulation, reflection, and evaluation. But the main driver is the imagination. And we're going to try and imagine a different world, a world where we're not going to have another war, where we're not going to have such endless poverty, such gross inequalities, where we might extinguish ourselves through global warming, where we don't destroy everything around ourselves, where we remain blind to so many injustices, historical and contemporary. So the idea is to go into a room, open-minded, the teacher and the pupils together, and to use the imagination as a driver towards asking, exploring, finding new answers, new questions, new ways of seeing. So that's the plan. That's why we're doing it through drama. And that's why we're looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, because these are our goals. This is what we've agreed we need to be doing. So the book is divided into 8 projects. And each of the projects looks at one or more of the goals. Some of the projects bring together all the goals, and some of the projects start with one goal, say, like project 1 starts with life on land, but very quickly moves into climate change, very quickly moves into the use of the land, caretakers of the land, historical injustices, colonialism, imperialism, custodians of the land in terms of indigenous peoples, alternative wisdoms. So you start with life on land, but you're very quickly moving outwards. So maybe what we can do here, Amanda, is look at the put the color wheel up on the screen, and we can look at these goals. And as you can see, looking around the goals there, you know, number 1, no poverty. Number 2, 0 hunger. Number 3, good health and well-being. 4, quality education. 5, gender equality. 6, clean water and sanitation. 7, affordable clean energy. 8, decent work and economic growth. 9, industry, innovation, infrastructure. 10, reduced inequalities. 11, sustainable city and communities. 12, sustainable consumption and production. 13, climate action. 14, life below water. 15, life on land. 16, peace and justice. 17, partnership for the goals. And it must be very clear to anyone that we're not only just talking about interdependence and interconnection between peoples, so that we all think of ourselves as global citizens. Clearly, these goals are also interconnected and interdependent. How can we possibly have 0 hunger, number 2, without no poverty, number 1? How could we possibly have quality education, number 4, without gender equality, number 5? So you can see how every goal immediately leads to another goal. How can we look at life on land or life below the water without looking at climate action? Number 8, for instance, decent work and economic growth. A subsection of that is 8.7, which is child labor. How can we understand and approach the problem of child labor without looking at industry, infrastructure, quality education, good health and well-being, peace and justice? And so all these goals start to bleed into one another. And so when we're working with the children and exploring the goals, we might start with 1 just for convenience as a way in, as a portal, but very soon they open up into exploring the others. And what we might do is maybe just look at project 1. I'll just talk to you a little bit about that. And after that, we can just talk a little bit before, and I'm probably just going to focus on 2 projects for today because it's, you know, so it's not too overwhelming. So project 1 in the book is called Seeds of Hope. Freeze Trees, Seeds of Hope. And this project starts with age group 4 years old and upwards. So all age groups are invited to come in at the beginning of this project. And then at a certain point, new material will be introduced for older students, age 10 and upwards. But to begin with, we're inviting, and I've done this in schools on many occasions, working with 4-year-olds, and it's always worked. Even young children seem to get it. And then the other thing I would say is that even though this is the first project in the book and it introduces a lot of the basic ideas, like drama ideas, like freeze frame and the structures and a lot of the concepts. And then when the new materials is brought in for older students, we also ask the older students to do the earlier stuff too. It's great fun for 15, 16, 17-year-olds to do the same stuff that you're doing with 4-year-olds. And in fact, adults love to play as well. It's all about play and exploring through play. one of the kind of sort of tricks I kind of use, which is kind of nice, works for me, is if I'm working with, say, teenagers who don't want to sort of be silly, who are very self-conscious about themselves, is I say, like, why don't we make up a play for small kids? You know, wouldn't it be great if we made up a play about climate change or the rainforest, or about, you know, we can make a play as if we're going to put it on for children. Then they love them throwing themselves around and being silly as if they were little children, and they can key into it that way. Although often that I don't need that. Often teenagers are very happy to behave in a very silly way and behave like 4-year-olds, and so do adults. So project 1, Freeze Trees, Seeds of Hope, starts off by looking at life on land. That's one of the SDGs, life on land. And we start there. And in a way, this is what I think the drama teacher does. Rather than start with a discussion, you know, as we do in most classrooms, around most subjects, the teacher starts to talk and discuss the area of inquiry. So for instance, if we're looking at the forest, or we're looking at biodiversity, or we're looking at habitat change and life on land, the teacher might say, let's be a rainforest. Let's make ourselves into a forest. Let's be a wood. Let's see what it's like being trees. And so this is how we make our way into this project. So from the get-go, I'm thinking of, I'm working with 4-year-old children, possibly, or 16-year-olds pretending to be 4-year-olds. And I say, okay, let's introduce the freeze idea. So firstly, everyone has to learn to freeze. And some kids, even though they might be, you know, 14, 15, 16 years old, may never have done drama before. So they may be the same as 4-year-olds as far as learning how to freeze. So they start off with freeze, as in, you know, playing statues like you do at parties, you know, and then once they get good at freezing, or running around the class and then freezing, then we introduce the trees command. And when I say tree, when the teacher says trees, they have to become a tree. So they can move their branches, their arms, their fingers, their twigs and their leaves, but they have to stay rooted to the spot because they're a tree. Now, when you say unfreeze and the kids move around the classroom, the teacher can choose between saying freeze or trees, which is fun because they sound similar and kids enjoy getting that right, especially little kids. They love distinguishing the two and getting it right. Once we got the trees established, the teacher can say, look, now we're a forest. Now we're a jungle. Look, we are trees. We're a community of trees. We are a forest. What's going on in the forest? And now the next layer is we start to introduce the animals, the creatures of the forest. So the teacher will say, okay, we're trees. Let's look down. Let's look around. What's going on in this forest? And then on the next unfreeze, the kids are invited to become different animals. And the teacher might say, let's fill the forest full of rabbits. And the kids will become rabbits hopping around. And then freeze, and now giraffes. And now they're tall, elegant giraffes with their necks reaching up into the trees. And freeze. And now let's have gorillas, and they all run around beating their chests, you know. So you can do this for ages, and it's great fun, of course. And you can vary it between like big animals and tiny animals. Let's have some spiders. Let's have some woodlice. Let's have some snakes. Let's have some. And so and then you keep, every time you want to just switch back, you just switch back to being trees. It's a great device for classroom control as well. Because, you know, anytime a teacher feels it's all getting a bit hectic or a bit mad or a bit lively, you can just say trees, and the kids have to freeze as a tree. It also opens up the immediate, we're already opening up the whole idea of reflection and empathy from different viewpoints, because the kids are now thinking of themselves as trees. They're empathizing with what it's like to be a tree. But then even then as a tree, they are looking out at the world and looking at the animals from a tree's point of view. And then when they're being animals, they can look at a tree from an animal's point of view. And all of these things start to link up in terms of reflective empathy. So you can play around with that for as long as you want to. It is very great fun. And at a certain point, we move on to the next stage. So what the teacher does now is say, okay, I'm going to tell you a little story, and we're going to follow that story like a little narrative. So the classroom is, the kids are now trees they are the forest, they are the jungle, and the teacher says, okay, I want you to feel the wind blowing through your leaves, through your twigs, through your branches, and it's lovely and gentle and soft on your bark and in your skin. But then it starts to get stronger and stronger, and the wind's coming up, and it comes up, and then you whip it up into a huge, big, almighty storm. And then the teacher says, and the storm blew up, and finally the forest was blown down. And at that point, all the kids fall onto the floor, including the teacher. If the teacher isn't wearing sensible drama clothing, you can kneel. Or find a position that's comfy for you. Get down as low as you can anyway, as low as you can to be with the kids. And then the teacher continues the narration with all the kids frozen, of course, there's a freeze. And now the forest is gone. What was once a noble forest is gone. But already, immediately, things are starting to happen. Underneath the leaf mold, down in the soil, seeds are starting to grow. And now the teacher invites the children to become seeds. And they're there in their little pods, and they're starting to break out of their shells. And this is done really, 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 really slowly. So you kind of ask them to kind of become the seeds, breaking out of their little shells, looking around, growing really slow and expanding physically. And the teacher does that with the kids to slow them down. So you only unwind really, really, really slowly, and maybe pause every saying, now we're young saplings, now we're teenager trees. And eventually, we become a whole forest again. And then the classroom is full now with a new forest. This is a new generation of trees that have grown. And then, you pause to allow that moment to breathe, to allow the kids to experience what it's like to be this new forest and to have come through that experience. Now we move on to a new stage where the teacher invites the children now to look at what happened from the eyes of through points of the animals. So what she says, I'm now going to call a meeting. We're going to have a conference of all the animals of the forest or the jungle. So I want you to sit in a circle, and I want you to choose an animal that you're going to be. And so they're all sitting in the circle, and the teacher says, we are going to look at what happened in the great, great storm. What happened to our ancestors? We've heard the stories, they've been handed down. We're now going to share these stories. And the teacher does this by being an animal herself. So for instance, like a snake. So she will just introduce herself by going and making a snake-like motion. And look at the kids and invite them to respond to her and repeat that back and repeat the gesture back to her. Because this whole session is going to be now, segment of the session is going to be to do with voice and answer. So when she does her snake sound, they give the snake sound back. And you're starting to develop a different language, the language of snake and how snake speaks. And the kids start to understand when snake means I want you to answer, I want you to say something, I want you to do something. And the other thing is you introduce this thing called the translation button. And the teacher can just come out of role if you want to and just say, look, here's the translation button. Whenever I press this, I'm going to speak in English. Okay. And then I press it again, I'm going back to being snake. So she says, okay, we're going to go around the whole circle. I'm going to invite you as all the animals of the forest to talk about what it's like. What is it like being you? Introduce yourselves. Maybe we don't all know each other yet. Let's introduce ourselves to each other, and let's talk about the great storm and what we know about the great storm and what we've heard has been passed down to us. So the teacher might just look at one child, and whenever I do this, the kids have all got their hands up. They all want to do it, they're dying to be the one. So, the teacher goes and looks at one child, and this child maybe goes, squeak, squeak, because they've decided to be a mouse. And so the snake teacher invites the rest of the class to go squeak, squeak back in the same voice, in the same language. And you can continue just using animal sounds if you like, with the mouse going squeak and the snake going, or maybe the snake, you're the snake teacher. You can do a few squeaks back, and you can have a conversation like that without even breaking into English. And it's great fun. And the other kids are kind of understanding what you're saying just by the way you're waving arms around and everything, and voice tone and body language. And then you might press the translation button. The teacher might say, okay, well, Mouse, tell us what it's like. And the teacher might say, okay, well, Mouse, tell us what it's like in the forest. You know, what's it like being you? And the mouse will go squeak, 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 squeak. And you go, oh my God, is it really like that? You know, oh, yeah, maybe some of us hadn't noticed what you've been up to. And then you might say, what was it like in the great storm? Have you heard what it's like if your parents handed down the stories? And the mouse goes squeak, 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 you know. So anyway, you can develop this in any way you like. You know, this is up to the teacher just to use their intuition and imagination to how to respond to the kids. And then if you move on, and the next kid's like, oh, a lion, you know, complete opposite. And the lion roars and the whole class roar back because they're going to speak lion language. Well, already we're opening this lovely portal for this idea of the classroom being a multicultural, you know, the forest is a multicultural place where all these different animals speak all these different languages. You know, mouse can speak lion and giraffe and chipmunk and snake and, you know, ladybird and eagle and bear. And isn't it amazing, you know, that we can all understand each other. And so lion roars and the teacher goes roars back, you know, and all the kids roar back. And then maybe the teacher can then press the translation. Well, tell us, lion, what's it like being you, you know? And lion talks away in lion talk for a while. And every now and again, the teacher can just press the translation button and ask lion to speak in English, you know? So what do you know about the great storm, lion? And it's funny, you can have a bit of fun with this. Sometimes the teacher can almost pretend to kind of not understand what lion's saying, you know. So lion's roaring and the teacher says, oh my God, lion, so you laze around in the sun all day. Is that what you do? And the lion will get kind of uppity about it and stuff. You can have a bit of fun, you know. So basically, but the idea with this is you don't dwell too long with each one because you maybe have 25 kids in the class. So you kind of go around the circle and make sure everyone gets in, and even little voices like mice get to have just as much representation as a big voice like a lion. And every single voice is responded to by the whole class with a chorus. So everyone is validated, everyone is included, everyone is equal, and everyone gets to talk about what it's like living in the forest, what it's like being them, what about the great storm, and everything. So at the end of this, and I'm cutting it short, obviously, just for the sake of today, but like there's more detail in the book, and much more detail about how you deal with this. So at the end of this session, you know, you can come out of roll. The teacher can say to the kids, "What was that like? What was it like being animals of the forest? What was it like being trees?" And you can have a nice discussion out of roll. And so. And then into a, you know, into reflection. And what have we learned? What do we know? Yeah. And so even with young kids, even with say 4 or 5-year-olds, even if we're not going to introduce the Sustainable Development Goals as such, we can still move into questions that relate to that. Like for instance, like, okay, there was a big storm, a great storm, an unusual storm, and you can start to link that to kind of climate change, into unusual weather events, extreme weather events. How do we respond to the storm? Do we stick together? Do we look after each other? What do we do when the trees were falling? Questions like this, which invite in a sense of empathy and empowerment, solidarity, at a very, very simple level, which even small children can understand. Do we look after each other, you know, when the trees were falling? A lion might say, yeah, I picked up mouse, I helped mouse, you know. So like it opens up all those pathways towards a basic sense of where we're going, even before we start introducing the SDGs as such. And then for young kids, follow-up. I mean, there's all kinds of cross-curricular follow-up, you know, from doing drawings and paintings of the animals, to writing a day in the life, your diary, you know, as what a day in the life of a bear, a day in the life of a spider, writing poems from an animal's point of view, creating a dance for associate, you know, with if this animal might invent a dance for itself, or you might invent a dance for the trees or a dance for the wind. And then you sort of move, as then we bring in the, we go up a layer into, say, working with age 10 and over, older kids, we can start to move into the goals and say, well, how does this all relate to the goals? And then you can start to move into the whole life trees. What are trees? How important are they? What is a tree? What does it do? What does it give? What does it take? What is it made of? How do we use them? How do we abuse them? How important are they to us? The soil, how important is the soil? We're running out of usable soil. We're at a crisis point with our soil and our agricultural methods. And then you're moving into climate change, the use of land. And then you're looking at then bringing in all the different subjects, you know, geography, history, ethics. From a historical point of view, we're looking at colonialism, we're looking at imperialism, we're looking at the way in which lands have been taken over, have been robbed. We're looking at custodians of the land in terms of indigenous peoples and their different attitudes to the land, different wisdoms, different ways of seeing things. I was doing a session this week with some kids, 10-year-old kids, a Zoom session in a school here in Galway, and the kids were all in role as things on the planet like rivers, sky, lakes, soil, and what was lovely, they wrote poems, and this is a follow-up, if you like, to this session. They wrote poems as if they were a tree, or as if they were a lake, as if they were the sky. And then the idea is you don't tell the kids in the class what you are, and the kids have to guess what you are from all the clues you have in your lines of your poem, you know. And we write these poems line by line, and again, that's in the book, a way in which a teacher can get kids to write poetry line by line, so that all the class are working together. No one's left out, no one's left behind. And in this session, these kids had like these wonderful poems, like 14, 15 lines long. And the kids were trying to guess this one girl, and they went round and around the class trying to guess what she was. Oh, you're a tree. Are you a flower? Are you an insect? What are you, you know? And in the end, she said, I'm a valley, a valley. And it was a fantastic moment where they went, oh my God, you're a valley, you know. And so you're just bringing in the kids at the level of the imagination in terms of what they're writing, but also how they're responding to each other. And then we're looking at, and then one kid said, she said, how can a mountain listen? How can a mountain smell? You know, mountains don't talk, you know, because we had this idea that the United Nations would be sick of listening to themselves and listening to all these human beings who are making such a mess of the world. And they'd invite the animals to come and speak instead, and invite mountains and rivers to come and speak at the UN and talk about how they were feeling, you know. And the rivers that said that they were polluted and they were sick of it, and the mountains said they were fed up with being, you know, destroyed, and the soil was fed up. And one girl said, yeah, but a mountain can't talk. And so then again, we brought in like the whole idea of indigenous wisdoms, you know, the idea to some, like, for instance, Native Americans would say, yes, you listen to the voice of the eagle, you listen to the voice of the river. We need to listen to the voice of the trees. This is a new way of relating to our planet. And, you know, there's a bit in the book, for instance, when Carl Jung went out to the United States, and he spent some time with one tribe, I forget the name of the tribe, but he asked the chief to talk about, the chief said, you know, all your ideas are coming from the wrong place. And Jung said, well, what you mean, what's wrong? And the chief put his hand on his heart and said, look, this is where your ideas should be coming from. So anyway, this is all in the book. And so you can see how it goes from like working with 4-year-olds up to material which 15, 16, 17-year-olds, third level students, adults could be dealing with. That first project ends with a focus on a guy called Richard Moore, who was an Irish guy who lived in Derry in the north of Ireland, who when he was 10 years old was shot in the face with a rubber bullet and blinded. When he was in the school, he was actually in the school grounds, and there was a sort of a demonstration or riot going on the streets, and a British soldier shot him in the face with a rubber bullet and blinded him at the age 10. And this guy, Richard Moore, you know, he could have become a very bitter kind of person, but he became this fantastic, wonderful, you know, person. He set up this charity, Children in Crossfire, working with kids around the globe in conflict situations. He taught himself to play the guitar. He tried to get his sight back for a while, but then he gave up and said, no, I have a vision. I don't need to see. There's a fantastic documentary about him. And then what amazingly, many, many, many years later, he found out the name of the soldier who'd shot him. And he wrote to this soldier and said, can we meet up? And they met up and they became friends. And then they met up with the Dalai Lama. And the three of them go around, after he invited the three of them to the Dalai Lama over, and the three of them went around the country kind of spreading this amazing message of peace and reconciliation. And so if you like, Richard Moore is there in the book as a beacon, if you like, or as an incredible example of conflict resolution and thinking outside the box and using your imagination, and peace and justice in somehow trying to weave them together. So that's project one. And I hope I've done it justice. I mean, I've flown through it. There's a lot more detail. There's a huge amount more detail in terms of follow-up, cross-curricular follow-up for both primary and secondary. And in a moment, I might move on to saying a little bit about project two. But before I do that, I'd love to get your response or any questions or anything you want to say before we carry on. Okay, Sue.
Thank you so much for sharing these ideas. Actually, this is quite interesting. Before, actually, I did some warm-up exercise similar to this, squirrel and the jungle like this, and then I didn't expect that actually the easy warm-up game can get deeper and deeper into so much meanings in it, such as the climate change and colonialism and the land's difficult ways of seeing those kind of things. This is quite interesting, quite inspired me a lot. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, the portal can be the initial portal can be quite simple and accessible to anyone, and then it can just become more complicated as you go, depending on how deep you want to go and how age appropriate, of course, you want to go. Yeah, thank you, Sue. Anyone else want to say something or ask something?
Rashid's got her hand up.
Yes, I have got my hand up. I wanted to ask you, Pete, how important is it for the teacher who is probably working on this book to understand each of these 18 points that were shown, and how important is it for the teacher to really understand in depth what UN wants for us to follow or for us to do, in terms of individual contribution as well. So the importance of understanding the whole idea before jumping into the project. The project is amazing. I mean, I think it's a beautiful way to bring any thought to a child's mind and raise questions, the right kind of questions. But from the teacher's point of view, how important or how in depth should a teacher go?
Yeah, I think, thank you. It's a great question, and I think what I think is that we're the whole aim of this is to bring about awake and aware global citizens. We're trying to turn these children into global citizens who think of themselves globally, who think about connections and interconnectedness, and of course, teachers are global citizens too. And sometimes we think, oh, all the teachers have to do is teach the kids to have good practices, but they will meanwhile carry on with themselves within a competitive, ruthless, brutal system of winners and losers, stressed out. So yes, the teacher needs to have the chart on the wall, the color wheel. They need to look at it every day and say, wow, these goals are fantastic. These are amazing. These should inspire me. I should think about this when I go into every lesson, whether I'm teaching maths or geography or French or cookery or whatever it is I'm doing. How can I weave these goals into what I'm doing? Like, what's the point, yes, of teaching maths if we don't look at how this maths leads to what technologies and what use of those technologies? We're going to make another bomb, so like, what's the point of teaching a language if we just learn 50 languages, but all we can speak in is the language of hatred and envy and jealousy and competition? So yes, the teacher, is a great question. The key teacher needs to look at these goals and think, yes, I must really understand these goals. What are they about? Why did we decide as a global community to pick these 17 goals? And I agree. The teacher doesn't have to necessarily be a drama technician or a drama and I'm asking teachers at second level, especially who are teaching any subject, to think, how can I use drama in the classroom? The kids are not, they can be still at their desks, they can still be sitting in their normal positions, but basically to teach you to begin with the imaginative exploration that you use in drama, to explore some of these questions. But yes, you may be an amateur drama practitioner, but I think the teacher really needs to look at those goals and think about them and think, what do they mean to me before I start to try and pass them on to the children? So I think your question is, yes, really good. Yeah. I hope that's come close to answering what you're saying.
I've just
Thank you.
a rather nice message here from Stephanie, who says, this sounds great. I think my students with special needs would really enjoy this, especially the students who sometimes have difficulty in speaking, actually. I work with students who largely present with ASD and some mutism.
Okay.
And I've pointed out that actually quite a lot of your projects come from a very, very simple, very basic starting point, which can kind of go anywhere. And Chris is just about to post a link to a piece of cake, which I thought might be of interest to Stephanie. So I didn't know if you wanted to respond to that comment at all.
Yeah, no, thanks, Amanda. Yes. By the way, the piece of the cake text is what we did in the last book club session, which is Project 4. Project 4 in the book begins with a text, a very simple text based on the Little Red Hen story. But yes, in fact, I've done quite a bit of work with special needs, with people with different physical and intellectual disabilities. I've worked in classrooms where I've had young adults, in fact, who are blind, in wheelchairs, with all kinds of different kind of conditions, sometimes signing in different languages. Even in Ireland, there's two different signing languages, and devising plays with these young people, often by just waving my arms around and gesturing them to do things. And maybe that's right, what we've just gone through here, I've done that with people with special needs, with people with brain injuries, with people with no drama backgrounds at all. And it does work. Yes. And I'm glad you brought that up.
We've got another comment from Joe. Do you still travel in the UK delivering workshops live through Zoom?
No, well, I don't as such. No, I mean, my work has been in Ireland now for many, many years. And I don't, but I'm hoping that possibly now this work with you, Amanda and Chris, through London Drama might be a portal for me maybe to kind of engage more with groups in the UK. I'd be quite happy to do Zoom sessions with any group, drama groups, schools, educational institutions, anyway. Anybody who would like me to come in, I will happily work with them. Okay, so yes, if you know anyone, please send them my way.
We certainly will.
So yes, here we have the contents page, and we can see that Project 1, Freeze Trees, Seeds of Hope, where we looked at life on land, SDG 15, moving into ecosystems, climate action, which is SDG 13, peace and justice, SDG 16, responsible consumptive democracy. So do you see how they all weave together? At the end of Project 1, I conclude by saying, okay, we've looked at the interconnectedness, if you like, the interdependence between human beings and other human beings, between human beings and other species, between human beings and the planet, in the shape of hills and mountains and water systems. Project 2 now asks the question, yes, but what about ourselves as individuals? How do we genuinely connect the global to the personal if we're not interconnected within ourselves as individuals? And here we go inside ourselves, and this becomes an exploration of the self, if you like. The interconnectedness that goes on within ourselves. How do we make decisions? How do we make good or bad decisions? And this project is called Brains, Hearts and Stomachs. And this comes out of a project I did many years ago, a community schools project, where I was invited to work with 3 different schools and I was going to work with the 3 different schools, or a class in each school, and then we were going to come together and do a presentation to the public. And I came up with this idea of, it was called Know Yourself, Know the World. And one class, the whole class, were going to be brains, and another class in another school were the hearts, and another class in another school was stomachs. So the whole class became a brain or a heart or a stomach. And they built this, I worked with a visual artist, and we built these amazing kind of like globes made out of paper and bamboo, and the kids were all inside. And when they came out, they were the brain. And the brains had a dance, and the hearts had a dance, and the stomachs had a dance. And they had ways of moving, which were like a stomach or like a heart or like a brain. And we explored these things. And basically what we started to look at was the idea of how interconnected are we inside ourselves? If we're not joined up people within ourselves, how can we become joined up people amongst ourselves or between ourselves? So this project starts with this whole, it's very developmental, if you like. And this is probably the most imaginative project in the book. So for instance, on a very simple level, it asks, for instance, you could get the kids into groups of 3, and one kid is going to be the brain, one's going to be the heart, one's going to be the stomach, but they are one person, and you can give them a series of challenges that relate to the Sustainable Development Goals. So for instance, you could place a person inside a shop, and this person is shopping and trying to decide what kind of things to buy. And the brain character might say, oh, I don't know what to buy. All these things look, a bit expensive. And the heart says, well, we must get the fair trade bananas, because, I've seen those videos of people, working in terrible conditions in different places. And the stomach voice says, yeah, I'm hungry. Can we buy something? So you get the kids to kind of work together as a threesome, with these different voices. And then you have other sessions where you're asking the whole class to be a brain, or the whole class to become a heart or a stomach. Like, for instance, a whole class stomach might be everyone standing in a circle, looking up into an imaginary chute down which the food is going to arrive. So maybe, Amanda, actually, could you go to page 34? Scroll down a little bit there. It says making up our minds, and this first example is the shopping center. Brain, this is what the brain might say. The child playing the brain. The teacher can give examples, and the children can go off and improvise their own scenes. Or the teacher might give these as starters. These are your first lines, but then ask the 3 to just continue the dialogue and see where they can get to. Think of themselves, of course, as one person. They have to come to some kind of agreement or come to some understanding which voice is going to get listened to the most. And if we scroll down to the next page, then Amanda, I think we go down to a couple more examples. Okay, here's, like, for instance, like the weather. The kids are just talking about the weather as a threesome. So the brain says, what a lovely day, I'll go to the beach. And the heart says, oh, I can feel the sun on my skin. It's so good to meet up with my friends. And the brain then says, oh, on the other hand, it looks like it might be raining. Oh, here's the rain. Heart, oh no, now I feel miserable. Stomach, I want an ice cream. Okay. And then we're now starting to link to climate action, Sustainable Development Goal 13. And if we scroll down to the next page, and this is just an example the teacher might give to get them going. And here we have a different community. Where there's a drought going on. Yes, and you can see this. This is just an example, like, the brain, what the brain, the heart, the stomach might say. And this is, this brings the children obviously into quite difficult emotional territory in terms of what it's like to be a starving person, or a person who's actually really faced with having to migrate, to leave their land because they can't grow anything. And then if you go around again, Amanda, like to the next example here, brings in COVID. And this is just an example here to get the kids going. Brain says, oh, sorry, we can't go to the beach. It's against the rules of the lockdown. And the heart says, I want to see my friends. I feel so sad being stuck in. And stomach, oh, okay, I'll binge on crisps and mindless online games if no one's going to see you. So it kind of, anyway, these are just kind of ideas to get the kids going. in their threes. The project develops, for instance, the kids are invited to imagine what it's like to be Donald Trump and Greta Thunberg. And so they get inside, they're given a speech by Donald Trump and a speech by Greta Thunberg, having pointed out to them that they both share the same microphone, they share the same platform, they both speak at these economic summits, they both speak at the UN, they hold the same microphone, and yet they both speak with such different things to say. And the kids are invited then into a Donald Trump speech or a Greta Thunberg speech and try to identify, when is the brain speaking? When is the heart speaking? When is the gut speaking? And so this project really opens up in a very, very imaginative way in terms of inviting us to think about ourselves and developing the whole idea of the whole concept of self and other, and how that relates to kind of the way we look at the world. Do we think of self and other in terms of empathy, or do we think it in terms of conflict and rivalry and competition? And then the other really brilliant part of this project, I think, which I find is where I get the deepest work when I'm working with students, is working on freeze frames around emotions, asking the kids to do a freeze frame of being in a state of hope or fear or anger or suspicion or solidarity, and then get them to move between, get them into a freeze frame of solidarity, and then talk about asking them to change to a freeze frame of suspicion over a slow motion, just from 20 seconds, and then freezing that and asking them to go from suspicion back to solidarity in 20 seconds. And then asking them to think about what went on, what thoughts came into their heads, what went into their bodies, what's going on. And when I've asked kids the question, for answers, a child might say, when she was going from suspicion to solidarity, she said, I just got fed up with having all that anger in my face. She said, I just got fed up with that feeling. I needed to change, And so anyway, look, we're covered so much. We tried to cover so much. So I'm going to stop there in terms of talking about, and again, we could have just a couple of minutes of people asking questions or any thoughts about what I've just said. I'm conscious of wanting to finish on the hour, Amanda and Chris. I did say we wouldn't go over, so we'll be winding up soon. And I hope people.
If people have got questions and want to talk for a little while, then that's okay.
Okay, we'll go for a few minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just checking the chat. Stephanie's saying that her students really do love and respond to drama, so she's very glad of this workshop. So thank you. Majid says, very interested in the topic, but has a very poor network situation. So was wanting reassurance that there would be a recording available, which there is. Anybody else got any questions or points? There's something that really appealed to me about the first one was this idea of this new United Nations, because as a secondary specialist, I could see all the primary roots in the play, and I was beginning to think, how am I going to get something secondary for them to bite into? And that idea of the UN having all the politicians being chucked out and actually being replaced with forests and valleys and air, and I thought that was a lovely idea, and I could see then some secondary students really getting into some politically deep issues, but having come from a very play-based starting point, which of course goes through all those well-traveled pathways through the brain, and then gets momentum into something different from that point. I really like that idea. Yeah,
thanks, Amanda. That is a great observation. That's true. I just saw a question from Mark, and he was asking about parents responding to some of the content that might be brought into the classroom. And I would say, yes, sometimes you're working with kids who are miles ahead of their parents in terms of awareness and imaginative willingness to be open-minded and explore things, and introducing them to some what might be seen as quite radical ideas. And sometimes I found that reflected by, sometimes a child might say something which you can hear the parents talking, yeah, but what about this? And they come out with some awful, terrible conservative line on something, and so, yes, within the classroom situation, I just have to find my way of just asking questions. I would never put anyone down for saying what I think I disagree with. I would just ask them questions. Oh, well, what makes you think that? And, you know, why, where is that coming from? And get us to explore rather than criticize a viewpoint which I would see as being, to me, conservative or negative or whatever. And hopefully, because then when that child's go home to their parents, they can say, well, we looked at this in the drama session, and then the teacher didn't, you know, challenge me, didn't tell me off, just asked me more questions and was interested to know. And the parents hopefully will be inspired by the fact that their child was engaged in an open-ended discussion. You know, that's the way I deal with it.
It's I think very often it's children that have got the headspace to think around these things. I think parents don't have a great time for this sort of thinking. You watch the news and you try and pass judgment on what you've been told in the news. You don't always have a lot of time to think underneath it. But this sort of work encourages children to do that. And the fact that that child has brought it to the tape from the tea table at home to the discussion table in school, it's actually quite that's a really healthy thing, regardless of what it is that they've brought. You know, that's actually, they've thought they've made that connection, and that they really want to air it again in a new forum, a new arena. It is interesting in itself. We've got Stephanie saying she's definitely tried to use this and get the book too. Been teaching drama for over 25 years, both within mainstream and SEN schools. And she says it's about time she explored and used some new material. So that's really encouraging. That's lovely, Stephanie. Thank you for sharing that.
Right. I should say as well that the although the book is available for €5 from AFRI, you just have to write to them, you know, at the email address admin@afri.ie. You can also download the book for free from the AFRI website, so you can just get the whole book.
We've put the website in the chat, so hopefully people can pick that up. We'll put that in the folder as well.
And obviously, if you've downloaded it online, it's very useful for instance, with that piece of the cake project to photocopy and to just, you know, it's more user friendly when it comes to kind of maybe working with students as well. Although it's lovely to have the copy in your hand, the paperback, I think, you know, to read yourself. It's very handy to have the online version.
And Jojo's making similar remarks about it being a lovely session. Thanking you very much.
Great,
and
thank you, everybody.
She'll get the book just for her own enjoyment, if nothing else.
Okay, great.